I watched them drag Sarah into Devil's Canyon like she was nothing more than a sack of grain. 5 men on horseback, their faces wrapped in dusty bandanas, moving like phantoms through the red twilight. Her screams bounced off the ancient stone walls, echoing and fading until there was nothing left but the wind and the pounding in my own chest. Just an hour before, I was watering my horse, Jericho, at Miller's Creek. The sun was warm on my back. The world felt quiet. Then the gunshots cracked through the air, sharp and ugly, coming from the direction of the Hendricks Ranch. I didn't even think. I just moved. By the time I crested the last rise, smoke was pouring from their cabin like a soul leaving a body. Old Jim Hendricks was lying face down in the dirt. I didn't have to check. You can tell from a distance. The way a man falls when his life is ripped out of him. 3 clean shots in his back. And Sarah was gone. The hoof prints told the story. They'd taken her alive. My hands were shaking, not from fear, but from a rage so cold it felt like ice water in my veins. I loaded my Colt, then my Winchester, the familiar clicks of the mechanisms, a grim comfort. Sarah Hendricks wasn't just any woman. In this God-forsaken territory, a place that judged a man by the price on his head or the dirt under his nails, she was the only person who'd ever looked at me and seen something more. 3 months ago, I'd stumbled into Copper Ridge with a bullet in my shoulder, bleeding out and too broke for a doctor. I was a ghost, just another wanted man ready to die in an alley. But she saw me. She took me to the back of her father's general store, cleaned my wound, and fed me hot soup without asking a single question about the blood on my clothes or the haunted look in my eyes. She just helped. Now the sun was sinking fast, painting the entrance to Devil's Canyon black as a tomb. Any sensible man would wait for daylight. Any sane man would ride back to town and gather a posse. But I knew the kind of men who did this. I'd hunted their kind my whole life. I'd seen what they leave behind. Bodies in shallow graves, twisted into shapes of their last moments of terror. Women. If they were lucky enough to be found at all, they weren't the same people who were taken. They were just empty shells. Sarah didn't have until daylight. She probably didn't have another hour. I thought about her smile last Sunday after the church service, how her hand had lingered on mine when she passed me the hymnal, a simple touch that felt like it could wash away a lifetime of sin. For the first time, I'd let myself think about a different life, a life where I wasn't always looking over my shoulder, a small piece of land, a quiet home. Waking up next to someone who wasn't afraid of the man I used to be. Those dreams felt like they belonged to another man now, a fool who'd let his guard down. Her screams were burned into my mind, a brand on my soul. Ahead of me, the canyon stretched out like the gaping mouth of some prehistoric beast, ready to swallow me whole. Somewhere in that labyrinth of rock and shadow, 5 killers had the only good thing I'd ever found in this world. They probably figured no one would be crazy enough to follow them in here at night. Devil's Canyon was a death trap even for experienced trackers in broad daylight. Narrow passages that could snap a horse's leg, sudden rock falls, and 100 ways to get turned around until you starve to death. Lost and alone. They were counting on me being smart, but they didn't know a thing about me. I checked my guns one last time, the cold steel a familiar weight in my hands. I nudged Jericho toward the abyss. The horse could feel it, the pure wrongness of the place. He fought the reins, tossing his head, his eyes wide with animal fear. I didn't blame him, but we were going in anyway. As we crossed from the last light into the deep, oppressive shadow of the canyon, I heard something that made my blood run cold. It was a voice. Faint, carried on the wind, but unmistakable. It was Sarah, and she was calling my name. But what I didn't know, what I couldn't possibly have known, was that following that voice wasn't a rescue mission. I was walking straight into a trap that had been laid for me 20 years ago, before I even knew Sarah's name. The ground inside the canyon was soft, preserving the tracks perfectly under the rising moon. And the story they told sent a fresh wave of ice through my gut. 8 sets of hoof prints, not 5. 3 more men had been waiting for them inside the canyon entrance. This wasn't some random raid that got out of hand. This wasn't about a few stolen cattle or a strong box full of cash. This was planned, meticulously. This was an ambush from the very beginning. My jaw tightened. Every instinct I had was screaming. Who were these men? Why go to such lengths just to grab one woman from a small, dusty ranch? The murder of her father was loud, messy. It was designed to draw attention. It was designed to draw me. I pushed Jericho forward, deeper into the maze. The red rock walls towered over us, so high they blocked out the stars, making it feel like we were riding through the belly of the earth. My horse's hooves echoed with each step, the sound bouncing off the stone, coming back at us like whispers from the dead. Every shadow looked like a man with a rifle. Every gust of wind sounded like a footstep behind me. This was their ground. I was the intruder. About a mile in, the main trail split. 3 paths diverged into the darkness. It was a classic tactic. Force your pursuer to make a choice that could mean the difference between life and death. I dismounted, kneeling to study the ground. The moonlight was just bright enough to read the signs. The main group, maybe 5 or 6 riders, had taken the wide path to the left, heading toward the heart of the canyon where the old Apache caves were hidden. It was the most obvious route, but 2 riders had broken off and taken the narrow path to the right, and one of those horses was carrying extra weight. Sarah. My gut clenched. They'd split up on purpose. Send the main force one way as a decoy, a big, loud target for any posse to follow. Meanwhile, a smaller team would take the real prize somewhere else. Somewhere quiet. These weren't just bandits. These were professionals. They knew this canyon like the back of their hand. They knew how to move, how to hide, how to make someone disappear forever. A name surfaced in my mind, a name that tasted like rust and gunpowder. Marcus Cole. Cole and his gang had been a plague on this territory for years. But he wasn't just a thug. Cole was smart, a former cavalry officer who'd used his training to become the most dangerous outlaw west of the Mississippi. He was cunning enough to plan something this elaborate, and he was cruel enough to take a woman just to watch a man tear himself apart trying to get her back. We had history, him and I. 5 years ago, in a dusty street in San Sebastian, I'd been the one to put his younger brother, Ethan, in the ground after a bank robbery went sideways. Cole had sworn he'd see me in my grave for it. I never figured he'd use an innocent woman to settle the score. The wind shifted, and I caught a scent on it. Wood smoke. Faint, but it was there. Coming from the left trail, the decoy trail. They'd made camp. They were confident enough to light a fire. That meant one of 2 things. Either they had more men than I could handle, or they believed their trap was perfect. They weren't worried about being followed. They were inviting it. I tied Jericho to a dead juniper, taking my rifle and a small pouch of supplies. From here on, I was on foot. A horse was too loud, too big a target. The smoke was a clear signpost pulling me toward the left trail. The obvious choice, the choice they wanted me to make. Cole was the kind of man who'd leave a trail of breadcrumbs leading right into a killing field. He'd have riflemen perched on the canyon rim, just waiting for a fool to walk into the light of that campfire. But then, just as I was about to dismiss the decoy trail, I saw something. 20 yards down the right path, the one I suspected Sarah had been taken down. A tiny flash of color, snagged on a mesquite branch. I crept closer, my heart hammering against my ribs. It was a piece of torn blue fabric, the exact same shade as the dress Sarah had been wearing at church last Sunday. My mind raced. Was this a clue she'd left for me? A desperate sign? Or was it part of the trap? Cole would expect me to follow the main group in the fire. That was trap number 1. But he was also smart enough to know that I might be cautious. He'd know I might look for signs. So planting a piece of her dress on the other trail, that could be trap number 2. A double bluff. Then I heard it. A scream. It echoed from the right trail, sharp and full of terror. It was a woman's voice. It was cut off abruptly, as if a hand had been clamped over her mouth. My first instinct was to run, to charge down that path with my rifle blazing. But I stopped. Something was wrong. Something about that scream felt off. It was too perfect, too cinematic. It sounded like someone acting terrified, not someone who truly was. I'd heard Sarah scream for real once, when a 4-foot rattler got into her chicken coop. It was a raw, wild sound, like a cornered animal. This was different. This was a performance. It was a lure. They were playing me. They wanted me to choose between the left trail and the right trail. They had traps waiting on both. So I took the third path, the middle path, the one with no tracks at all. It was barely a path, more like a goat trail, a narrow passage that cut straight up the canyon wall. It was dangerous, almost suicidal to climb in the dark, but it was the one thing they wouldn't expect. If Cole was playing chess, I was about to flip the board over. The passage was a nightmare. It forced me to move sideways, my back pressed against the cold stone, along a ledge barely wide enough for my boots. A single loose rock, one moment of carelessness, and I'd plunged 60 feet to the jagged rocks below. The wind howled through the narrow opening, trying to tear me from my perch. Halfway up, my hand brushed against something wedged into a crack in the rock. It felt like cloth. I pulled it free, my fingers closing around a small, soft object. It was a child's rag doll. Weather-beaten, one button eye missing, its yarn hair faded and frayed. It was old, had been there for months, maybe longer. And right below it, scratched into the stone with a nail or a sharp piece of rock, were two initials and a number. M.W., age 7. My blood turned to ice. This wasn't the first time Cole had been here. This wasn't the first time he'd taken someone. This doll wasn't just lost. It was a marker, a final message left by a little girl named M.W. A little girl who, by the looks of this place, had never made it out of Devil's Canyon. My hands clenched around my rifle, my knuckles white. The pieces were starting to fall into place, and they were forming a picture more horrific than I could have imagined. This wasn't about revenge on me. It wasn't about a robbery. This was about something much, much worse. Cole wasn't just an outlaw. He was a collector, and Devil's Canyon was his private hunting ground. I pushed forward, the doll tucked safely in my pocket, moving with a new, terrible purpose. The ledge finally opened up, leading me into a small, hidden clearing, a bowl of rock nestled between the towering canyon walls. And what I saw there nearly made me lose my footing and fall back into the abyss. 3 wooden crosses. They were driven crudely into the ground, each one marking a shallow grave. The dirt on one of them was fresh, turned over maybe a week ago at most. Carved into the wood of each cross was a woman's name and age. Martha Walsh, 19, Rebecca Stone, 23, and on the fresh grave, Maria Santos, 16. My mind reeled. Maria Santos. I knew that name. She was a girl from Silver Falls who'd vanished a few weeks back. The whole territory had been searching for her. They'd given her up for dead. Cole wasn't just a killer. He was a serial murderer. He'd been using this canyon as his personal cemetery for God knows how long. Sarah wasn't his first victim, and if I didn't stop him tonight, she wouldn't be his last. Suddenly, I heard voices drifting up from below me. Low, confident tones. Men talking, laughing. I crawled to the edge of the clearing, my stomach in a knot, and peered down into a place I never knew existed. It was a hidden valley, a massive natural amphitheater concealed within the canyon's depths. 3 large campfires burned below, casting flickering shadows on the rock walls. I could count at least a dozen men, maybe more, moving between the tents and supply wagons. This wasn't a gang's hideout. This was a fortress, an army. But it was what I saw in the center of their camp that made the world tilt on its axis. It was a wooden cage, a heavy iron-barred cage, big enough to hold a person, and next to it there was another cage. And this one wasn't empty. A young woman sat inside, her long, dark hair covering her face. She was huddled in the corner, a portrait of absolute despair. Then one of Cole's men walked past the cage and she looked up at the sound of his footsteps. The firelight hit her face, and my world shattered into a million pieces. It wasn't Sarah in that cage. It was Maria Santos, the girl who was supposed to be buried under that fresh cross, not 50 feet from where I was hiding. She was alive. This changed everything. My mind struggled to catch up, to process the impossible reality in front of me. Maria Santos was supposed to be dead. I remembered the talk in town. I remembered her poor mother, weeping in the street. I'd seen the notice for her funeral in the Silver Falls Gazette. Her family had buried an empty coffin. Cole wasn't just killing these women, he was faking their deaths, making them vanish from the world so completely that even their own families gave up hope. He was letting them be mourned, letting their graves be dug, and all the while he was keeping them here, alive, caged like animals in his canyon hell where no one would ever, ever think to look. The sheer, calculated cruelty of it was staggering. It was a level of evil I'd rarely encountered. I counted the men again. 15, no, 16 of them. All armed, all alert. They were positioned like soldiers, not outlaws. Sentries posted at every approach, weapons caches stored in strategic locations. Cole had been a cavalry officer, and it showed. He had turned this hidden valley into an impenetrable bastion. But I still couldn't see Sarah. She wasn't in the cage. She wasn't by the fires. That meant she was either in one of the tents, or they'd taken her somewhere else entirely. The thought was a spike of pure dread. Leaving Maria in that cage felt like leaving a part of my own soul behind. But charging in there was suicide. One man against 16? I wouldn't stand a chance. It would just get all three of us killed. I had to be smart. I had to be a ghost. I began working my way around the high rim of the valley, moving from shadow to shadow, looking for a weakness in their defenses. A better angle, anything. That's when I heard the scrape of a boot on rock. Right behind me. I spun, raising my Winchester, my finger already tightening on the trigger. But it was too late. Three of them. They seemed to materialize out of the darkness, appearing from behind rocks I would have sworn were empty seconds before. Three rifles, all leveled directly at my chest. The clicks of three hammers being cocked echoed in the sudden, deadly silence. "Marcus said you'd come," the biggest one said, a gold tooth glinting in the moonlight. He had a nasty, jagged scar running down his cheek, pulling his mouth into a permanent sneer. "Said you were too stupid and too sweet on that Hendricks girl to stay away?" There was no way out. They had me. They marched me down a steep, winding path into the camp, prodding me with their rifle barrels. The warmth of the fires hit my face, a stark contrast to the cold dread settling in my bones. As we entered the circle of light, I got my first close look at Marcus Cole in 5 years. He'd aged and not well. His dark hair was streaked with gray, and new scars crisscrossed his face like a road map of violence. But his eyes were the same. Cold, intelligent, and utterly devoid of mercy. They were the eyes of a wolf who enjoys the fear of his prey. He was sitting by the main fire, calmly sharpening a large Bowie knife. He didn't even look up at first, just continued to draw the blade across the whetstone with slow, deliberate strokes. "Well, well," he said finally, his voice a low, gravelly rasp. He rose to his feet, dusting off his trousers. "The famous James Callahan, the man who haunts the dreams of every outlaw from here to the border, walking right into my parlor." He circled me slowly, like a predator inspecting a trapped animal. "Tell me, Callahan, how does it feel to be the hunted for once?" I kept my mouth shut. My eyes darted around the camp, cataloging everything. The number of men, the types of weapons they carried, the locations of the horses, the layout of the tents. Maria Santos was watching from her cage, her dark eyes wide with a mixture of terror and a tiny, desperate flicker of hope. A hope I knew I was about to extinguish. Up close, I could see the toll her captivity had taken. Her dress was torn and filthy. Her face was gaunt, her cheekbones sharp angles under pale skin. She'd been here for weeks, maybe longer. But there was a fire in her eyes, a defiance that hadn't been broken yet. "You're probably wondering about our little collection," Cole said, following my gaze to Maria. He gestured around the camp. "See, I learned something important during my time in the army. Fear is a powerful weapon, a very useful tool, but it has its limits." He walked over to Maria's cage and ran his fingers along the iron bars, making her flinch. "Hope," he said, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "Hope is even better. You let them think there's a chance of rescue. You let them believe that someone, somewhere, is still looking for them. And they'll do anything you ask. They'll be cooperative." He looked at Maria, a cruel smile playing on his lips. "Little Maria here has been very cooperative, haven't you, sweetheart? Tell our friend what happens to the girls who don't cooperate." Maria's voice was shaky, but clear. They get buried. Alive. Cole nodded, as if pleased with her answer. Smart girl. We find that the prospect of a slow, suffocating death in a shallow grave does wonders for a young lady's attitude. He turned his attention back to me. Now about Miss Hendricks, Sarah. She's proving to be a bit more spirited than our usual guess. But I have a feeling she'll calm down, especially once she sees what happened to the last man who came looking for one of my girls. He gave a sharp signal to two of his men. They walked over to a large canvas tarp behind one of the tents and dragged something heavy out into the firelight. It was a body, and even in the flickering light, I could recognize the silver star pinned to the corpse's vest. Sheriff Tom Bradley, from Copper Ridge. He'd been the one leading the official search party for Maria Santos. They'd found him all right, but what truly made my blood run cold wasn't the sight of the dead lawman. It was what Cole pulled from his own coat pocket next. It was a letter, an envelope sealed with wax, with my name, James, written on the front in a familiar, elegant handwriting. It was from Sarah. Cole held up the letter, a triumphant gleam in his cold eyes. He broke the seal with his thumb and unfolded the paper with the slow, deliberate movements of a man savoring every second of his victory. The paper crackled in the firelight as he held it up to read. Let's see what the little lovebird had to say, shall we? He said, projecting his voice for the whole camp to hear. His men chuckled. He cleared his throat dramatically. My dearest James, he read, his voice dripping with mock sentimentality. I know we haven't spoken of it directly, but I believe God has brought us together for a purpose. Your kindness to me, a stranger, has shown me the good man you hide from the world. If you are reading this, then it means you have made your choice. It means you've decided that a future with me is worth the risk. My stomach twisted into a knot of pure acid. She had written it. The words I'd dreamed of hearing. She had been ready to build a life with me. And somehow this monster had gotten his hands on it. But how? Sarah was supposed to give it to me yesterday evening, after her father had gone to bed. She's quite the poet, your Sarah, Cole continued, a sickening grin on his face. She goes on for 2 whole pages, babbling about a life together, the children you might have, growing old on some quiet little farm, away from all this violence. It's touching, really. Almost makes a man believe in happy endings. He looked up from the letter, his eyes boring into mine. Almost. He carefully folded the letter and tucked it back into his coat. Of course, he said, his tone shifting, becoming sharper, colder. She wrote this 3 days ago, before she found out what her dear old daddy really was. The words hit me like a punch to the gut. What are you talking about? Cole's grin widened into a predatory sneer. Oh, you don't know, do you? You really don't know. About Jim Hendricks and his little business arrangement with me? About how he's been my eyes and ears in this territory for the last 2 years? Feeding me information on which ranches to hit, which families had money hidden away, which travelers were carrying valuables. The scene at the Hendricks Ranch flashed through my mind. Old Jim, face down in the dirt, 3 bullets in his back. But now that I replayed it, something felt wrong. The position of the body, the lack of any struggle, the way the scene was set. It wasn't a fight. It was an execution. Jim Hendricks was my inside man, Cole said, his voice laced with contempt. A pathetic, sniveling coward who sold out his neighbors to keep his own skin safe. Fed me everything I needed to know about every family within 50 miles. In exchange, I left his little ranch alone and split the profits with him, 50-50. A perfect partnership. From her cage, Maria suddenly spoke up, her voice stronger now, filled with a righteous fury. He's lying. Sarah found out about her father 3 days ago. She found his ledger. That's why she's really here. With a roar of anger, Cole lunged toward the cage and backhanded Maria hard through the bars. The sound was sharp as a gunshot, and she cried out, falling back onto the cage floor. Shut your mouth, girl, he snarled. But the damage was done. The truth was out. The pieces were slamming into place now, forming a picture that made me sick to my stomach. Sarah hadn't been kidnapped in a random raid. She'd found out her father was a traitor. She must have confronted him. and she'd come here voluntarily. She had probably been trying to make a deal, to buy back the lives her father had sold, to fix the mess he'd made. "Where is she?" I demanded, my voice a low growl. "Where is Sarah?" Cole recovered his composure, smoothing down his coat. He gestured with his chin toward a larger tent at the far end of the camp, set apart from the others. "She's in there. Been trying to negotiate for the lives of everyone her daddy helped me rob. Quite the little martyr, offering herself in exchange for amnesty I was never ever planning to give." He took a step closer, his face just inches from mine. His breath smelled of whiskey and decay. "But here's the funny thing, Callahan," he whispered, his eyes glittering with a malevolent fire. "She actually thinks you're coming to save her. She's been waiting for you, the noble hero riding to the rescue." He paused, letting the words hang in the air. "She doesn't know that you're already too late. She doesn't know that the hero is about to die at her feet." Just then, the flap of the large tent opened, and Sarah stepped out. My heart stopped. My breath caught in my throat. But the relief that should have flooded through me never came. Because it was her. But it wasn't. It wasn't the terrified, disheveled victim I expected to see. Her blue dress was clean, not a speck of dust on it. Her blonde hair was brushed and pinned up perfectly. She walked with a calm, confident stride, like she owned the place. And when she saw me tied up and held at gunpoint by the fire, her expression wasn't one of fear or relief. It was disappointment, annoyance. "You shouldn't have come, James," she said, and her voice carried none of the warmth, none of the kindness I remembered. It was as cold and hard as the canyon stone. This was supposed to be simple, clean. My mind refused to process what I was seeing. This was the woman who had bandaged my wounds, the woman who had fed me soup when I was half dead, the woman whose smile had made me believe I could be a better man, the woman who had written that letter, pouring her heart out onto the page. "Sarah, what the hell is going on?" The words felt like sandpaper in my throat. She ignored my question. She walked over and sat down gracefully on a wooden crate across the fire from me, smoothing her skirts as if we were sitting in her parlor, having tea. "My father was a weak man, James," she said, her voice matter of fact. "He took their money, but he was consumed by guilt. He kept records, ledgers of every family he betrayed. He thought he could use them as insurance, in case Marcus ever turned on him." She shook her head with a sigh, a look of pity on her beautiful face. "Stupid man. He didn't realize that keeping evidence of your crimes isn't protection. It's a death sentence." Cole moved to stand behind her, placing his hands possessively on her shoulders. It wasn't the gesture of a captor with his victim. It was the gesture of a partner, an equal. "Sarah came to me with a proposition," Cole explained, his voice filled with admiration. "A business proposal. Clean up her father's mess. Eliminate him and any other witnesses who could connect him to our operations. And in return," he squeezed her shoulder gently, "she would help us expand. New territory, new opportunities." I stared at the woman I thought I knew, the woman I thought I loved, and I couldn't find a single trace of her. It was like I was looking at a complete stranger wearing her face. "The letter," I choked out. "You wrote that letter, knowing. You wrote it to lure me here." "I wrote it to make sure you'd come alone," she corrected me simply, without a hint of remorse. "Marcus needed you out of the way. You've been a thorn in his side for years, and I needed it to look right. It's better for everyone if people remember you as the hero who died trying to save an innocent woman, instead of the washed-up killer you really are." Each word was a knife twisting deeper. My world, my hope, my one chance at a decent life, it had all been a lie, a carefully constructed trap. From the cage, Maria Santos spoke again, her voice cutting through the night air like a razor blade. "Tell him about the others, Sarah," she spat. "Tell him about Rebecca and Martha. Tell him how you picked them." Sarah's perfect composure finally cracked. For just a second, a flash of pure fury crossed her face. "Shut up," she hissed. "She picked them out," Maria screamed, ignoring Sarah's glare, ignoring Cole's menacing presence. "She rode into town all smiles and sweetness. She made friends with the lonely girls, the new arrivals, the ones with no family to miss them too much. The ones nobody would look too hard for. Then she'd come back and tell Marcus where to find them, who to take next. The full, complete horror of it crashed over me like a tidal wave of ice. It wasn't just about her father. It wasn't just about betraying me. Sarah hadn't just been cleaning up a mess. She hadn't been a reluctant accomplice. She'd been his scout, his recruiter, his partner in this entire grotesque enterprise. Every woman in those graves, every girl who had vanished without a trace, Sarah had marked them. She had delivered them to this hell. She had chosen them for the cages and the graves. I looked at her, at this beautiful, monstrous woman. "You're a demon," I whispered. Sarah stood up from the crate and walked slowly toward me. She crouched down until we were eye to eye, her face inches from mine. The scent of lavender and soap still clung to her, a sickening mockery of the innocence I'd believed in. "I'm a survivor, James," she said, her voice a low, intense hiss. "My father was going to get us all killed with his weakness and his guilt. This world doesn't reward the weak. It eats them alive. I did what I had to do to secure my place on the side that does the eating." She reached out, her fingers cool against my stubbled cheek. The touch that had once felt like a blessing now felt like the caress of a snake. "I did care for you, in my own way," she said softly. "You were strong. You were a useful tool, and that's why I'm going to make this quick." As she spoke those words, as she looked into my eyes with a chilling sort of pity, my gaze flickered past her, toward the cage. And I saw it. Maria. She wasn't just staring in defiance anymore. Her hands, hidden in the shadows of the cage, were working frantically. She had something small and sharp in her hand, a piece of metal, maybe a nail she'd pulled from the wooden frame of the cage. She was scraping at the rusty pin of the lock. She was almost through. Sarah either didn't notice or didn't care. She was lost in her moment of triumph. She pulled a small silver-plated derringer from a hidden pocket in her dress, the kind of gun a lady might carry. She pressed the cold twin barrels against my temple. The click as she cocked the hammer was deafeningly loud in the sudden silence. "Any last words for the woman who broke your heart?" she whispered. I didn't look at her. I looked past her, my eyes locking with Maria's. I gave the slightest, almost imperceptible nod. It was now or never. I looked back at Sarah, into her cold, beautiful, empty eyes. And I said the only words that mattered. "Maria, now!" It was like a lightning strike. Maria didn't just open the cage door. She exploded out of it. 20 feet of pure cage fury and desperation, a silent, screaming projectile of vengeance. She crashed into Sarah with the force of a battering ram, a moment before Sarah could pull the trigger. The derringer went off. The shot was deafeningly loud, the bullet whining past my ear and sparking off the rocks behind me. The two women hit the ground in a tangled heap, rolling and clawing at each other in the dirt and dust by the fire. For a heartbeat, the entire camp was frozen in shock. Then all hell broke loose. Cole's men scrambled for their weapons, shouting in confusion, but they hesitated. They couldn't get a clear shot. Sarah was right in the middle of the frantic struggle, her clean blue dress already ripped and smeared with dirt. That split second of hesitation cost them everything. I used the chaos, throwing my entire body weight backward, crashing into the gold-toothed guard behind me. We both went down hard. I twisted, slamming my boot into his knee. I heard a sickening crack, and he screamed, his rifle clattering to the ground. Meanwhile, Maria and Sarah's desperate fight had carried them right to the edge of the main campfire. And in a moment of sheer, brilliant instinct, Maria did something that changed the entire game. She grabbed a large burning branch from the fire. With a wild cry, she swung it in a wide, sweeping arc, scattering a shower of red-hot embers and flaming debris across the dry brush and canvas tents that surrounded the camp. The effect was instantaneous and catastrophic. The dry canyon brush went up like it had been soaked in kerosene. Flames erupted, racing up the canvas of the nearest tent with a hungry roar. Within seconds, the fire was leaping from tent to tent, from brush to supply wagon, spreading with terrifying speed. A wall of fire and smoke was rapidly encircling their fortress, cutting off their escape routes, turning their hidden sanctuary into a raging inferno. In the blinding smoke and escalating panic, I managed to get my hands on the guard's fallen knife. I sawed through the thick ropes binding my wrists, the fibers parting with a satisfying snap. I was free. Cole was bellowing orders, trying to organize a bucket line from their water barrels, but it was a fool's errand. The flames were already 20 feet high, and the thick black smoke was making it impossible to see, impossible to breathe. His empire was burning to the ground around him. Sarah finally broke free from Maria's tenacious grip. She scrambled through the dirt, her eyes wild, searching for the fallen derringer. But I was faster. My boot came down hard on her wrist just as her fingers brushed against the silver gun. I felt the delicate bones snap under my heel. She let out a piercing shriek of pure agony, a sound far more genuine than the one I'd heard on the trail. The derringer skittered away into the darkness. She looked up at me from the ground, her face contorted. The mask was finally completely gone. There was no more pretense of the sweet church girl, no more calculated composure of the ruthless survivor. All that was left was raw, cornered animal hatred. "You have no idea what you've done," she snarled, cradling her broken wrist. "You stupid, sentimental fool. This was bigger than Cole, bigger than a few missing girls. There are people, powerful people, in every town from here to San Francisco. Governors, senators, judges, they paid for this, for the girls. You haven't stopped anything. You've just destroyed their supply chain." Her words hung in the smoky air, another layer of horror to this unending night. This wasn't just Cole's private sickness. It was a business, a human trafficking ring that reached the highest levels of power. Maria appeared at my side, a specter in the smoke. She was holding Cole's own rifle, her small frame steady, her eyes burning with a cold fire I recognized all too well. "She enjoyed it," Maria said, her voice cutting through the roar of the flames. "I heard her, planning with Cole, laughing. She liked picking the ones who would suffer the most, the ones who still had hope in their eyes." The fire was out of control now. The heat was unbearable. Half of Cole's men weren't fighting anymore. They were fleeing, scrambling up the canyon walls like rats from a sinking ship, abandoning their leader, their camp, their whole operation. Across the clearing, near the edge of the encroaching flames, I saw Cole. He wasn't running. He was standing perfectly still, his face a mask of cold fury and calculation, watching his life's work turn to ash. His eyes found mine through the smoke. "This isn't over, Callahan," he shouted, his voice carrying over the crackle of the inferno. "I know who you are. I know where you go when you think you're safe. I will find you. I will burn down everything you've ever cared about." Then as a massive tent collapsed behind him in a shower of sparks, he turned and vanished into the smoke and shadows, a ghost returning to the darkness. He was gone, leaving Sarah to face the justice she had so long evaded. Sarah saw her chance. With Cole gone and my attention on him, she staggered to her feet and tried to run, to follow him into the smoke. But Maria was ready. She raised the rifle to her shoulder. The movement was fluid, certain. There was no hesitation, no doubt. The shot was a single, definitive crack that echoed off the burning canyon walls. Sarah Hendricks dropped to the ground. The woman who had smiled at me in church, the woman who had written me a letter full of beautiful lies, the woman who had sent countless innocent girls to their graves was finally still. There was nothing left to do. We climbed, Maria and I, scrambling up the same treacherous goat path I had used to get in. Below us, Devil's Canyon was a raging cauldron of fire and smoke, a funeral pyre for the secrets and the evil it had held for so long. When we finally reached the top and looked back, we both knew we had survived something that would haunt our dreams forever. But we had also ended a nightmare. We had brought justice to the graves of Martha Walsh and Rebecca Stone. We had given Maria Santos her life back. The woman I thought I loved was dead, killed by the very darkness she had embraced. Her betrayal left a hole in me, a cold, empty space where hope used to be. But as I rode away from that burning hell, with the dawn breaking over the mountains and Maria Santos riding silently beside me, I felt something I hadn't felt in a very long time. I felt free. This fight was far from over. Cole was still out there. And now, thanks to Sarah's final venomous revelation, I knew he wasn't the real head of the snake. He was just one fang. There were other, more powerful monsters hiding in plain sight. But they had made one critical mistake. They had shown me their faces, and now the hunted was about to become the hunter once again. If you believe that true justice sometimes has to be taken, not given, then do me a favor. Hit that subscribe button and ring the bell for notifications, because my story isn't over. Not by a long shot, and you won't want to miss what happens next.